I'm gonna give you guys about 5 minutes to copy down. These are the only notes for today, and then we'll just do some discussion about the section, and then I'll give you a little bit of time to get started on the homework for Monday. So let's talk just a little while about this section here. Now we're into the late 1800s and coming up on the turn of the 20th century or the 1900s. And we have people that are starting to really come in mass and settle in the Great Plains, which would be what states, what region of the United States, what are known as the Great Plains? Does anybody know? Think about which plains or think about which states are really large and flat and good for farming. Maddie?
Would it be like Kansas and Wyoming?
Yeah. So kind of this Middle West region here. Yeah, all of these. Indiana actually was still considered the East. We already had a lot of settlement over here. But yeah, Iowa, Minnesota, the Dakotas, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Wyoming, all those big, wide open states that really didn't have a whole lot of settlement or industry at all. So just vast open fields and prairies was the most common word used to describe the terrain in this area. So we have what are called the transcontinental railroads. Before this time we had railroad systems, but they didn't stretch all the way from the east to the west and vice versa, and also from the north to the south of the country. So this made it very easy for people to travel all the way out west. It also drew in a lot of immigrants to help build the railroads. So it provided a lot of new jobs for people, which was another reason that people flocked west. And so typically the people who would come out to help build the railroads would then just eventually settle in the west, and so the populations grew and grew. So again, the government is encouraging people to settle out west in order to just make the country larger, basically, and more powerful, and give people more room for their own and better opportunities. So they offer all of these free land grants. If people are willing to come out and settle on a piece of land and turn it into a profitable farming area, then they will be given this free money from the government. So it was actually a really good offer in theory. However, a lot of times, families would be promised these plots of land, but the land that one family got might not be quite equal to the land that another family got, might not be as rich or able to grow crops as other plots of land. So it wasn't always the fairest deal in reality. And then also a lot of the plots that were meant for individual farming families were scooped up by the railroad companies and by land speculators who were guys that went out in search of land, and they would purchase it and then sell it at a much higher price to individuals who were desperate. So there were a couple of flaws with this government plan, as there often are with government plans like this, right? Giving free land that's sometimes too good to be true. The government decides also, on the other hand, that they do want to preserve some of the natural beauty of the West, and so they think, oh, wait a minute, we have all these people coming out now, and they're building up houses, they're building up towns, and they're farming this big open land, but we want to preserve some of it. So they decide to strictly set aside specific portions of the West, and so those portions are now considered wildlife preserves. And one of the biggest examples of that was Yellowstone National Park. Has anybody ever been to Yellowstone before? Okay. So very beautiful, obviously, and Yellowstone came into existence during this time, late 1800s, and of course it's still around today. So we have several other national parks as well, and we have reservations, and we have wildlife preserves, and for this very reason. So a couple of the challenges that new settlers had to face out west. There weren't many trees out west. You have a lot of prairie land and farmland, desert land, and not a lot of things to use to build homes. Typically, we always use wood to build homes even now. And so since they didn't have any trees or wood, they would use what was called sod, which is basically just soil from the ground, prairie soil that had like a layer of grass on top, just like if you were to go outside and dig a scoop of earth, they'd have grass on top. And so they would construct their homes out of this. Other people would construct, if they lived in a area that was more hilly, they might try to construct houses called dugouts, like in the side of a hill. So they try to take advantage of whatever resources were available to them. The book talks about pioneer women and how much work they really did. They're responsible for taking care of the children, making everybody's clothes, feeding everyone, usually educating the kids because, at this point when people are coming out, they don't have established schools yet, at least not for a little while. So they also did a lot of the farming work along with their husbands and kids. These women are, a pioneer woman is said to be somebody who's very strong and independent and really willing to get out there and do the dirty work, if you will. Number 3, which you answered for your homework, talks about new technologies and new farming equipment and how those really helped settlers to tame the prairie, meaning to make it easier for them to control crops and to harvest crops and that sort of thing. Out in the Great Plains states, wheat was the biggest crop that farmers produced, and so if you know anything about how wheat is harvested, it's, there's this great long process to actually picking out like the wheat that we use to eat and to cook with. So it grows like a plant, obviously, if you've ever seen a wheat field. We have wheat fields in Indiana as well. So let's get a couple of ideas from you. What did you write for number 3? How did some of these technologies help, or how would it have been difficult for these new farmers if they didn't have these new technologies, like the plow, and talks about the steel windmill and barbed wire and things like that? Olivia?
The steel windmill, it brought water up to keep the plants hydrated.
Yeah. If they hadn't have had this steel windmill, how would they have had to get water to water the plants, do you think? How did people do it beforehand, Holly? Yeah, the people taking it out there physically, right, and putting it onto the land, or maybe using wells and systems of, like very rudimentary systems of, underground tubing and things like that. But yeah, typically they would just water things by hand. Morning, Paige. Yeah. Yeah, so yesterday we talked about barbed wire, and now we have an easier way for farmers to keep track of all of their animals and cattle and ensure that none of them just get spooked and run away forever. So they are now enclosed, and the barbed wire also served another purpose, and that was that it gave people a visual boundary that you were now on someone else's property. Otherwise, it was very difficult to tell. People used to put a stake, one wooden stake at the end of their property, and it's well, first of all, that would be easy for somebody to just take out and say, this is my land now. So it was very much a eat or be eaten kind of scenario in the West, because the government really didn't have that much control over who owned what property. They didn't have a whole lot of say, at least not initially when settlement out west was going on. So people were really in charge of protecting their own land and their own animals and crops. Good. What did railroads do? If we hadn't had railroads during this time, what kinds of struggles would people have faced? How did the railroads help? Olivia?
The two coasts wouldn't have been able to really interact with each other
Yeah.
easily.
Hardly at all. I mean, you guys know how long it takes to get to California by airplane, right? It takes a whole day of travel, and then setting it up in the meantime, right? So to get any kind of message out there, or conversely out east, would have taken forever. And now with the railroads, things are much faster. The railroads also, they became a huge business because they were easily able to transport cattle and crops that farmers in the West wanted to sell to the East. So if there hadn't been these railroad companies around, then we probably would have had cowboys still herding cattle across the western frontier and somehow trying to transport it to markets in the east, and that would have just taken forever. So the railroads were a very, very, very good invention for numerous reasons. The only problem, though, is that since the railroads, the farmers really became dependent on the railroads, and the railroads really kind of had a, I don't know if monopoly is the right word, but they held a lot of influence over farmers and other businesses because they could charge whatever they wanted to transport crops and cattle because there's no other method of doing it. They wouldn't have cars, they couldn't just drive them on their own, right? So they really were at the mercy of railroad companies. That's the best word I could think of for it. So they're dependent on the railroad companies. Okay. Were there any other technologies that you wrote about that were different than what we already talked about, Marnay?
Like I talked about the steel plow and the reaper, because it was like really harsh work and really backbreaking trying to like reap the wheat. And also like the wooden plows would break a lot because the prairie grounds were so tough. And with the steel plow, it was easier to get through the soil, and then with the reaper, it made it easier to and quicker to you know, like instead of taking over 2 hours to make a bushel of grains, it took 10 minutes.
Yeah, good, very good. The other thing too is that with machines, farmers wouldn't have had to hire people to help, right? So before, you had individuals out laboring in the wheat fields, like literally hacking like a couple of strands of wheat at a time with a sickle, like the Grim Reaper carries around, right? The sickle is like the long blade, yeah. Oh, yes, you're right, Aaron, yes, you're right, but so very similar, right? It's a long blade. So anyway, that means that they would have been able to save some money not having to hire farm hands. Now the machinery was very expensive, but once they were able to buy it, then they would have it for a long time, right? Metal machines last much, much longer than wooden machines for obvious reasons. But Aaron?
You can wait till after.
Okay, sure. All right. Something else too that is kind of funny, but was very practical, was that a lot of people had very large families. They had a lot of children, especially if they lived on a farm. And why would they have wanted to have a lot of children? Ollie?
So they could do a lot of labor.
Yeah, so that they could have free laborers, basically, so that they'd help out with the farm. So that's pretty typical thing to do. Yeah, Maddie?
They also talked about like John Deere and Cyrus McCoy.
Yes. Does anybody know where John Deere came from?
I've heard of it.
Little trivia for you. It's not Indiana, but there's actually a big John Deere factory in Iowa, and I've been to it before. They have like I have some family members that live in Moline. It's actually in Illinois, but it's right on the borderline of Iowa as well. Anyway, they have a big John Deere like display house and like a gift shop, and they have huge tractors that like the kids like model tractors out on the floor of this museum, and kids can go and sit in them, and the wheels are huge, and you can like sit and take pictures inside. But anyway, John Deere first started developing, not tractors yet, obviously, but just machines and other instruments that made farming much more convenient. So, good. Thanks for mentioning that. Anything else from number 3 that you heard about? Okay, good. Well, we'll go ahead and stop there then, and I'll give you the last few minutes to get started on the homework for Monday. And also next week we'll start on current events again, so we'll have them for next Friday. Yeah, Aaron?
I actually like to tell you the difference between a scythe and a sickle.
Okay, sure,
Sorry?
go for it. I'd like to
Scythes-
know the difference.
scythes are actually kind of a longer blade kind of thing with like a longer handle on it.
Okay.
While a sickle has like a shorter blade and a shorter handle.
And,
like a wooden one.
and sickles are more like curved, aren't they? Like
yeah,
more of a crescent
yeah,
moon
they're a little,
shape?
they're a little more curved than a scythe
Okay.
is. A scythe is more like with a little bit of a.
Yeah. So the Grim Reaper actually carries a scythe then,
Yes.
not a sickle. Okay. Interesting.
Because sickles are more like small blunt weapons, while a scythe is more like a sword or a
Yeah, okay,
axe in a
okay.
way
that
where
you
you really
could
gotta
do-
swing it.
Gotcha, okay,
What do you
okay.
think?
So what would a scythe be used for then? If sickles are more used for getting at crops that are low to the ground, what do you think?
I'm not exactly sure what scythes are used for. I mean, most things I've seen scythes used for were as weapons.
Yeah,
so.
that makes sense. Okay. That's interesting. How do you know the difference between the two?
Because I've seen a scythe and I've seen a sickle,
Okay.
and so I can pretty much tell the difference.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Oddly enough, I've seen a sickle used for more than just a farm tool.